Welcome to the EcoSend podcast. Be inspired, educated, and entertained by the world's most ambitious leaders, putting climate at the top of their agenda.
Hi there, welcome to another episode of the EcoSend podcast. I'm James, your host. For those of you new to the show, this is a weekly show where we talk to other people in the world of business and running organisations that are trying to make the planet a little bit better. I am thrilled to be joined today by Juliette. Juliette is the founder and CEO of Climate Connection, which hosts the UK's largest monthly event for climate professionals. Juliette spent over 5 years in the US working in early stage deep tech and climate startup creation, and is intimately familiar with the innovation and entrepreneurial sector. Juliette is also, though that's not all, Juliette is also a public speaking coach and a huge advocate for mental health awareness. So I think we're going to talk about some amazing topics today, Juliette. I'm thrilled to have you on the show. How are you doing today? Hi.
Hello, James. Doing great. Excited to be here and get to chat through some interesting topics in the sustainability and climate world.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me. I'm curious then, tell us more about yourself, Juliette, and maybe a bit more about Climate Connection, and curious to hear how you've gone from your beginnings to where you are today. It's always fascinating to hear the story of why you're doing this today.
Yeah, so I think there's two stories here. One is the how did I get into climate story, and the other is the how did Climate Connection come into being story. And so the how did I get into climate story, actually, I'll sort of start with a bit of a fun fact. I was
love a fun fact.
Yeah. I was actually a climate denier in my teens, because I had a terrible geography teacher who came in and basically indoctrinated us that climate change was not real.
Wow.
And which I think, if you're going to just take a moment and reflect, like that in and of itself is a really interesting and important piece, because it just shows like the huge impact that our educators have on what people's thought is developing to be at those early ages.
Yeah.
So I spent probably 3 to 4 years not necessarily kind of actually campaigning against any kind of climate change progress, but certainly kind of staying far away, like sort of like, oh, someone's talking about that, let's just walk in the other direction.
Wow.
And it's something that kind of that skepticism that I learnt in my 9th grade geography class basically faded over time as I kind of took in other news sources and met people who were in the space and whatever else. But it still is something that I think back to a lot in understanding how other people may have come to not believing in climate change, and how easy it is to basically be influenced by different people.
Wow.
So that's kind of a little bit of an early on glimpse. In terms of how I got into it after my climate skepticism gradually abated, I originally thought that I was going to be a diplomat. I grew up in Geneva, which is a very international city, home to the United Nations back when it was founded as the League of Nations, and very, very international space. And there was always a part of me that wanted to be working alongside other really mission-driven people and doing good for the world effectively. And so I was like, you know what? Clearly the obvious path to doing this is let's go off and be a diplomat and work on big concepts like world peace and all of this type of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I went in and actually worked for the United Nations and realised this is not for me. And the real, I think some of the classic moments was just the recognition of the amount of red tape and bureaucracy and so forth. And it was probably it was a very interesting experience, but it was probably also one of the most frustrating experiences of my life, being surrounded by so many really interesting mission-driven people, all of whom were like shackled in their ability to actually do stuff because of the sort of level of bureaucracy and kind of, we need to make sure that we don't accidentally cause a diplomatic crisis. So, I basically
I've had a bad day.
I basically realized through that experience that I wanted to stay in a mission aligned sector, but I needed to find a space where there was a drive and the ability to actually kind of innovate, change things, bring in new solutions, etc., without having to face like X many levels of approval, which was very much kind of the situation when you work for one of the big kind of non-governmental agencies that are in that sector. And yeah, so moving to Boston for a master's degree is the point in time where I kind of took a moment to figure out what this new pivot was going to be, what sector I was going into. And right at the right moment, I came across a really fantastic organisation called Greentown Labs, which was an organisation that actually was focused on helping early stage startup founders with climate-focused innovations to commercialise those innovations by kind of building those startups. So absolutely fantastic environment, 100 different innovators all under one roof, all working on, alternative ways of making solar panels more efficient, or how to produce chemicals in ways that are, way less harmful for the environment, like loads of very, very scientific, really in-depth innovations that were basically being kind of scaled up and commercialized by these early stage founders.
And no red tape.
And no red tape, yeah. So it was the perfect environment because it was very much everyone is like all in on the climate thing, all in on making this happen, really kind of driven by the mission. And at the same time, it was moving at the pace of the private sector. And probably actually faster than the pace of the private sector, because when you're a startup and you've got limited cash and you're, kind of running up against it, everything needs to go as fast as possible so that you can kind of get where you need to before you run out of money.
Yeah. Nothing focuses the mind like a declining bank balance. Yeah.
Yeah, basically. Well put.
Amazing. So that was Boston, where are you now? You're now in the UK, and
yes. I worked for Greentown Labs, and then moved over to California for a different organisation called the Activate Fellowship. Similarly focused on early stage science commercialization with a strong focus on climate as well. So basically probably about 4 years or so of working with early stage startups in the climate tech space before I then moved back to the UK and then started Climate Connection.
Incredible. What a story. There's really a real twist and turn, what's going to happen next kind of story. That's incredible. They'll make a film about this at some point, I'm sure, Juliette.
I'm not so sure about that, James. I think there are some other stories out there that are pretty great.
So Climate Connection is your series of events. Obviously, there's a lot of events going on all the time. I'm very thrilled to see lots and lots of people talking about climate, especially, and maybe that's the bubble I'm in, but like there's a lot of great people coming together all around the UK, all around the world. What makes Climate Connection different? What's your whole goal with Climate Connection?
Yeah, so I guess I can tell the Climate Connection origin story now, which is
go for it. We're here for this. So
when I moved back to the UK, it was basically post-pandemic, and everything that used to exist in the climate space had kind of died. And so I moved back and was thinking, how am I going to meet all of the great people that I want to be working with in this country? Who are the innovators that are working on really interesting stuff? What are the organizations that are pushing this forward at a local and national scale? And I was just looking around, and I was like, there's basically no events happening because everyone is kind of like not sure about whether we can meet up yet. Everything that used to exist that brought people together had died off. And so the actual first Climate Connection event basically emerged from me noticing that, teaming up with someone who was already UK based and knew the ecosystem a bit better, and basically just sending out an invite going, hey, like, let's hold something so we can all get together in person for the first time now that we're allowed to, and actually kind of get to meet each other. And so that was the origin. But what I realized as a result of a few different pieces, like one, probably COVID definitely was a big influencer in this, to my background as a public speaking coach and kind of having organized or coached people on how to run really good events in the past, was that there was a really big need for whatever events we ran to have a really strong interactive component. So I wasn't interested in running events where you show up and you listen to a speaker for half an hour or a panel for 45 minutes or an hour, and then you maybe have some drinks and go home. Considering that we'd all just come out of like being away from each other, it felt wrong to put something on that was basically something that you could have watched on Zoom. And so everything that we did was really about how do you create as much human interaction as possible so that we're generating conversations, deep connections, people who are going to come back and get to know each other again in the future.
Amazing.
So that was kind of the inception. And that has very, very much been the core of Climate Connection after that, which is how do you put basically human needs and what people actually want at the start of how you plan an event. I can say more about that if you want to. But
no, that's a refreshing take. I mean, I think everyone's been to events where sometimes it feels like the event's more for the sponsors than the attendees, and and a lot of the speeches can be from sponsors, and the interaction of guests is actually more of an afterthought. So that's incredible. So the format for Climate Connection is a bit different to that then. Tell us more about like what that looks like today then. Like how is it different?
Yeah, so many different pieces. I very much talk about the concept of human-centric design when it comes to our events. So as you said, a lot of what's wrong with the way events are currently run is people kind of go, oh, we should put on an event because that's a thing you should do. If you're doing marketing and if you want to be known in the space, like we should probably have, I don't know, a winter drinks party, or we should throw a panel and just get some people in and get our name out there. And it's very much driven by, as you said, either the desires of the organisers, if they're doing the event for their own benefit, or it's driven by the desires of the sponsors if someone's putting on the event and getting it funded by someone else. And very infrequently is it driven by what it actually should be, which is the desires of the attendees. And so if you really want to run a good event, you actually need to stop and think, okay, well, what are the people who I want in the room going to actually appreciate? And how can I create an experience that they are going to remember so that next time I run an event, those same people are going to come back?
Yeah.
And so that to me is the core piece around how do you design an event. In terms of like the practical bits that we have after that, we have some internal rules around a variety of things, like never have a speech more than 12 minutes long, because frankly, human attention span is even that. Most of them that we do are like 7 or so minutes long, but 12 is like our absolute max that we'll let people do. We have a huge emphasis on interaction, making people meet each other. We'll do facilitated networking where we'll tell people to walk up to a stranger and have a conversation about a particular topic and answer a question together, get into a debate, whatever it may be. Often, honestly, a lot of what we do is basically going like a reflection of what is it that annoys us about how normal events are run.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so probably go ahead.
I was going to say, have you ever had to chuck someone off the stage for going on too long? Has anyone exceeded their 12-minute quota?
I have interrupted people and gone, hey, your time's up. Like, I need you to wrap this up.
Yeah.
So that's definitely happened. And I often give people who I can sense might not follow our rules a bit of a talking to before and certainly afterwards if they do. I mean, a different rule that we have is that you just can't sell. Like, even if you're a sponsor, even if you're someone who's hosting us in the space, even if you're a startup that's in the middle of a fundraise, like one of the biggest rules that we have is like no selling and no pitching your startup or your business. Because the reality is, like, if we're showing up to an event, we're not there to be sold to. We're there because we want to learn, because we want to be inspired, because we want to hear people's stories. And so that's a really core component of what we do. And I would rather people really create a beautiful talk and a really inspirational or educational talk, and then step off stage and have me walk up and go, by the way, that startup is fundraising.
Yeah.
Than to let them go and do an actual fundraising pitch, because they will basically get much less recognition for that, and a less happy audience, basically.
Totally. It's so interesting hearing you say that, because it's it's pretty easy to say like our event cares about attendees. It's easy to say some of this stuff. It's even easy to say like, yeah, we don't let sponsors pitch, but like it's very hard to actually follow through and deliver on those things. And it's wonderful to hear that that's like such a crucial part of the whole ethos of Climate Connection, because I think it's just it's so easy to sit around and sort of say those things, but it's like it's a very different thing to actually execute on that and truly deliver on that to the point where the audience can feel that too. But I know, like, even though I haven't yet been to one of the events, I know that the audience will appreciate that, and that will be the reason the audience comes back and trusts the whole damn thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's very much what we saw. Like when we started running these events, after the first event, basically everyone who attended was like, please run these again, please do them monthly. And so we did. Yeah. And in the first 6 months, we outpaced every venue that we hired. We just kept selling out, kept outgrowing space until we basically became the UK's largest monthly event for climate professionals, for climate tech, and have stayed the largest event for climate tech since. And so, now we run 40 events per year on a variety of different stuff, but there's a really, really clear kind of loyalty and appreciation from people around just the quality of what we do and the fact that we really stick to those rules. So yeah. And I guess there's also something there about starting with those clear goals in mind, rather than like running something and then trying to retrofit some of that can be incredibly difficult, I guess. And awesome. I guess I should live and breathe what you're just saying there, and say if anyone wants to attend Climate Connection, we'll definitely link to the site and make sure it's very easy to check out when the next one's happening, because I need to get myself along at the very least, so count yourself an extra member if you got room. You are very much invited, James. You're very much invited.
Amazing. Now I know, Juliette, you wanted to talk about innovation, climate innovation in particular. You've clearly got a ton of experience in this space, trying to bring great ideas to life, and having seen that on the other side of the pond, and seeing that, I guess, is a huge part of what Climate Connection is doing. So what's happening now? Why are we all not driving? Why is the whole world not driving electric cars? Why are we not all powered by solar panels? And tell me more.
Yeah, so there are really kind of two sub pieces within this that I was talking about today with you. And the first is to talk about at the early stages of innovation, what's missing. And then the second is to talk about when you actually have the innovation, why are we not seeing that roll out faster?
Sure.
And so when you look at the early stages of innovation, the first thing I'll say is that we are very lucky in the UK to have a really, really good startup ecosystem. If you look kind of worldwide at, amount of money invested, like support and ecosystems there, it's basically the United States and then kind of the UK and then a few other countries in the EU after that, possibly Israel. And so when you look at the amount of money invested and the ecosystem of early stage angels and venture capital and so forth, the UK is actually in a really, really good position, which is lucky. And, although the government could be doing a heck of a lot more to support startups through, a variety of things ranging from programs to help them build up and commercialize and helping them get factories out there and so forth, that's already a really good start. What we're missing, though, is when you look at what it takes to actually get an innovation out there, and just to clarify, like the majority of what I'm talking about when I talk about innovation in this context is hard tech. Are you familiar with the concept of like hard tech innovation versus perhaps just like regular tech?
It would be good to explain. I mean, I have not actually personally heard the term hard tech. I mean, there's deep tech, there's
hard tech. Yeah, people kind of use those words somewhat interchangeably.
Sure.
I'm not going to go into the slight differences between them because I don't think that's going to be like super interesting for most people here. But
I mean,
hard
a lot of tech is quite hard. A lot of for a lot of people. I mean,
yeah. So okay, fine. I'll do a quick my understanding of when people use the word deep tech versus hard tech versus regular tech.
Sure. Yeah, please do.
Regular tech is generally in most people's mind software. So if you're like, I work in tech, that could mean I work at, Google, whatever else, where you're mostly working on software packages. As a result, it's the kind of thing where once you've created the software package, that's very rapidly scalable. And we can make that, we've created the product, maybe with a team of like sub 5 people, and you can actually go out and sell that to, hundreds or thousands of customers. And yes, your team is going to grow over time and your product will get better over time. But the time to which it takes you to get that out in the world is much, much more rapid.
Yeah.
Hard tech and deep tech, almost exactly the same depending on who you ask. Some people will tell you hard tech is that there has to be a physical component to it. So like, is it something that would need to be produced in a factory or require some kind of physical infrastructure, or does it change the physical infrastructure of the world? That would be kind of hard tech. And deep tech, sometimes used interchangeably, is basically often considered to be hard tech plus things that are as hard to build as hard tech is.
Sure.
So basically people lump in things like AI or like big data stuff when it's the really complex stuff, not like kind of, I don't know, I've built an add-on to ChatGPT, more like I'm developing the state space from scratch and it's really complex. People sometimes chuck that into deep tech.
That's a brilliant explainer. There we go.
Yeah, so that's my understanding and the understanding that some of the industries I work in have of those 3 terms. Yeah. And so one thing to understand about like climate innovation is that hard tech / deep tech is where the majority of what we're actually going to need for the climate crisis comes from. Like there's only so many things that we can make X percentage more efficient by a software optimization. The reality is you have to build buildings with less carbon intensive materials, right? You have to, as you said, drive cars that aren't producing greenhouse gas emissions. You have to produce chemicals in ways that are not polluting the environment. Everything we use in the world around us, I mean, just like physically look around you, right? Anything in your house was produced somewhere or grown somewhere. You've got a plant. It was produced or grown
ticks one
somewhere.
Box,
yeah.
It's in a pot though. It's in a pot.
There we go.
It's not just growing out of the ground. Yeah.
Well, and it was grown somewhere by someone and transported to you, and so there's even that will have its own carbon footprint. And so basically the reality of if we want to decarbonize, if we want to hit climate goals, is we have to change the physical infrastructure of the world. And that means that a huge amount of the innovation that we're doing is going to be in that hard tech and deep tech space. And so here's the difficulty. If you're innovating in that space, you have to, at some point in time, figure out how to mass produce whatever the thing is that you've just created. And it's not scalable like software is, and it takes a heck of a lot more capital to be able to actually get there. And so that is why basically people think about that sector as more difficult to invest in, and why originally, at least 5 or 6 or 10 years ago, there were significantly less investors there. We're doing a lot better now, but that was one of the biggest things. And the hole that remains at the moment is, although we've got now a decent number of early stage deep tech and hard tech investors that will come in when you're first developing your prototypes and helping you kind of scale up to a certain stage, once you get to the I need to build my first factory stage, there's very, very little funding out there. It's really difficult to find funding because the banks will basically go, well, hang on a second, you want me to give you a loan to build a product that can't yet be sold and hence can't be proven that you're going to have revenue. And also you're not yet sure whether the factory is actually going to succeed in making it to the standard and quality that's needed, because there's all sorts of issues when you start to produce something en masse. You want me to give you money for that? Like, what?
Yeah, have all my money. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, there's a subset of specialized investors that will touch that stuff, but there's not enough of them. And so first of a kind is what it's called FOAC investment in the climate tech innovation space is a really difficult sector. It's basically the hole that is missing in that climate innovation process. It's sometimes called like the valley of death. The idea being that most of the startups are going to get to that stage. They're like, yay, we finally figured it out. We're ready to mass produce this, or at least to produce it on a certain scale. We need a factory. We're good to go. And then crickets. And then they fail because that funding isn't available. So that's one of our first biggest issues right now with climate.
Wow. Yeah, that I totally I mean that's actually such a great explainer and really does a good job. It seems that there's so many challenges there that just don't exist in the world of software, which is much more my background, and it's easy to sometimes, I guess, to take for granted, like incrementally building software. You can roll things out to customers straight away. The idea of the number of steps a company has to go through to take an actual like hard tech innovation from idea through to something that is a household item or a truly changing it's incredible anyone manages to do it in a way. Like so it's amazing to hear that there are people out there trying to solve that. That's incredible.
Yeah, there definitely
have
are.
You seen have you seen any success stories there, like in recent times, like anything that's come through that's
there are a handful of startups, I would say, honestly, primarily in the United States, that are getting over this hurdle. And in fact, we're increasingly seeing basically startups getting to a certain stage and migrating from the UK to the US, particularly because of, the most recent IRA subsidies and so forth that have come in as a result of the previous government. And so I say the previous government, I mean, the new government isn't yet elected, but in process. So the IRA really has created incentives and subsidies and so forth that are making it much more attractive for people to go off to the United States, where also capital is generally a little bit more available, and produce those types of innovations. So, one of our most recent speakers at our July event was a company called Enzo, who are producing tires that are specifically made for electric vehicles, because electric vehicles have a very different kind of weight profile to regular tires, and you need a different type of efficiency and grip and so forth if you want to be optimizing that. And they've just opened a factory in the United States. And so that was a UK-based startup that is now, producing en masse in the US as a result of those subsidies. So this whole exists all over the world. Even in the United States, we could do more with more funding there. But it is certainly more acute in the UK than it is in the US. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose a lot of our innovators to that migration as a result.
Sure. Okay, there's some homework for some people. I don't know if we have anyone listening who has a spare, I don't know, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of pounds.
That's usually the scale. It's usually about 50 million-ish.
50
million to 200 million, depending on kind of what you're looking at. But
Got it. Well, if you are listening and you do have 50 million that you're wondering, like, what do I do with this? How can I make a highly risky investment, but that will change the world? Well, you've now found the place. Who knows? So interesting hearing about that gap in the funding piece, Juliette. But back to earlier, you were saying there were actually two pieces where there's a need for investment and help along that journey. So what was the other side?
Yeah, so the second piece is kind of this understanding of how long it takes to actually have things adopted in the world.
Right.
So people talk about the adoption curve as basically a curve where you sort of look at when a new innovation comes out or a new product or whatever it may be, how does that product get basically dispersed in the market? And so if you kind of look at that curve, it's a nice little bell curve. Many people will have seen something along those lines. And on the earliest side, you've got this concept of the early adopters. So this is like probably a combination of, your mum, your aunt, and your best friends, and then the people that you know, and then the handful of people who hear about what you're doing and go like, oh, you know what, that's weird, but I'm into it, and I'm going to go be one of the weirdos who supports this at the very beginning. And so those early adopters kind of come on, and they're like your strongest advocates are the people saying like, this is awesome, let's roll this out. And then it kind of just increases with a very sort of difficult learning curve initially, until you get to a point where you've hit about 50% of the market. And then you've got those late stage adopters who are coming in, who are starting to adopt it because they're seeing it in lots of other places. And they're going, oh, right, I see, whatever, solar panels are a real thing, or I've seen enough of those around. I kind of get what they're about now, and I'm just going to do it because everyone else is doing it. All the way down to the end of the curve, which is where you've got your skeptics. So this will be people who are like, I don't believe in change. Like whatever it is you've made, it's it's stupid. I like to stick to the old ways, etc. And so they'll be the hardest to convince.
Your geography
to get
teacher,
in.
For instance.
Yeah, my geography teacher, who I don't know how she feels about solar panels these days. You'd have to ask her. And so that kind of adoption curve tells you sort of how people respond to innovation, and that's one piece of it. But the other piece is, how do you actually get those innovations out in the world? And what are all of the different human barriers or physical barriers that are there to this stuff being produced and mass adopted? And some of them, as we just saw, are related to, well, how fast can you actually produce this stuff? Like if you need to go from 1,000 units to 10,000 units to 10 million units to multiple hundreds of millions of units, that's going to take years and years and years to build up the factories and infrastructure that you need to be able to get that out in the world. And then you have all of the kind of regulatory side, and then you have kind of people's behaviors and how people are responding to things, and are they willing to make that change, coming back to that kind of adopter curve of, is somebody excited about it? Will they change the way that they live their life to use your product? Does your product require that or not? Or is it a product that can just be dropped in? So there's lots of different pieces that come into basically explaining why it is that even if we've got some really brilliant solutions that are actually kind of proven as working, why are they not everywhere in the world already? And when you sort of look at how long this takes, that's where it gets really worrying. And the example that I'll choose here is the one that we just spoke about, because it's probably one of the poster kids of the climate space, which is solar panels. Like, what better innovation could there be out there than a simple piece of like material that basically takes a completely free energy source and gives you electricity, right? It's like, oh, fantastic. The sun is there. Now we have electricity.
Let's use it. Yeah.
Great. So it's a great innovation. It was actually invented. I mean, let me just double check this so I don't get this wrong. But this solar panels were actually invented, I believe, in the 1800s.
Whoa! What?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, let me check this one here. Okay. Some of the original research was that far back, but let me be accurate here. So the photovoltaic effect was discovered in the 1800s, and then in 1954, Bell Labs in the United States created the first actual photovoltaic cell, which is made of silicon and can convert sunlight into electricity with an efficiency of about 6%. So,
wow.
Even if you take that as being the real invention, that's already like exactly 70 years ago that was invented. Yeah. And then, it was used in like small scale space projects and so forth by NASA and various other organizations. And it's only in the 2000s that people actually started really kind of commercializing it for general use. And so if you were to take the 2000s as being like, oh, now we have a product, that's still 20 years from 2000 until now to basically get to where we're at now, which is solar represents 5% of the world's energy, right? So we're still not at full deployment of solar. And that's if you take a timeline of, oh, this was available to be used and produced in the 2000s. So it's incredible. Nuts. So the amount of time that it can take to roll this stuff out, to bring also, we talk about the cost curve. So to bring the cost of this stuff down, because the first time you create a product, it costs way more than the, 10th, 100th, 1000th, millionth time, etc. So solar panels now are so much cheaper than they were. And that took, subsidies and investment and people being willing to pay a high price initially and so forth to get there. But all of these different factors just basically go to show that, hey, you could have something that's really cool and that could have a significant impact on the world. And it could take you, decades and decades and decades before you get to, even a marginal like amounts as solar panels are now, 5% of the world's energy production ish.
That is incredible. And, I guess to some extent, there's also an element of like marketing has a big part to play here of like people need to know about the thing. And it's like, I don't think anyone could argue that solar panels have not been known about for like 20 years. So it's like, it's just incredible that the length of time there, and it's incredibly eye-opening to see that, like, tracing back to like the 1950s. I can only hope that with the attitudes that we increasingly have as a society today, and the technology and innovation we have today, that timescale shrinks a bit. But you know, 70 years for a new innovation is a long time to wait to make 5% of a dent.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it is.
yeah.
And that's why, you know, things like governments coming in with subsidies early on, legislation actually making people change the way that they're consuming, working, what products they're using, you know, how factories are operating, etc. Like, all of that is so crucial to sort of force people into adopting things earlier on. And also, obviously, through subsidies, bring the cost down at the point in time where we're kind of in the early stages of producing it, and things still kind of cost more than they should. So there's a lot to be done on a government level to kind of try and accelerate those curves. Pretty difficult problem to solve.
It just as well, there's an event to bring people together to try and solve it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and we do have government members there. We have startups there. We have the investors there. Lots of different intersections of these problems are being worked on, for sure.
That is very reassuring. Very reassuring. Juliette, I know we've gone, this has already been a wonderful show, and I know we've already gone over half an hour. I'm not as strict as your talks at your events, but I feel like there's many more topics we could cover. Maybe we'll have to do another episode at some point. But I did briefly want to touch on the future, and what you see as the future in the space, and the future of innovation. Any thoughts there? I think you've already shared a lot, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts there.
Wow, the future of innovation.
I'm not asking for predictions, just any thoughts on how things might change over the coming years.
I think one trend that I think is really positive is, on the one hand, we are seeing governments come in with different policies to support rolling out climate innovation, or, you know, helping people to kind of start nudging, helping, forcing, whatever you want to call it, depending on the type of policy, different companies and individuals to start using more sustainable solutions. That stuff's great. The other thing, though, that I think is worth mentioning is that because those subsidies have been up and down, because those policies have been up and down in different governments across the world, there has also been, I think, a very positive mindset shift within the innovation sector, where people have gone from, oh, this is a thing that needs to happen, and therefore I'm going to create it. And as a result of creating it, I'm going to assume that a government subsidy is going to make this a viable product, into actually, whatever product we create, we need it to be something that is a no-brainer to our customer, regardless of government subsidies, and regardless of kind of what may or may not influence that adoption from a sort of, I want to be a climate positive company perspective. So to put it simply, basically, whereas we used to go, oh, we should just innovate because we need things for the climate, and we'll just worry about the cost or why the customer will use it, that's kind of someone else's problem. A lot of people are now going, actually, no, we're only going to create products that are also a benefit to the customer from an efficiency point of view or a cost point of view. We're going to pay way more attention into how can this be a drop-in solution that can be used with existing infrastructure or existing ways that people do business, etc. And so there's an increasing trend towards, like, let's just make this a no-brainer product, regardless of the climate implications and the government things. So you would want to buy this instead of your current product, even if you didn't know that it was good for the climate. And taking that approach and seeing more and more innovators recognize that, and obviously more and more investors in the venture capital and angel world, basically like step away from investing in products that are not taking that approach, means, I think, also that we're hopefully orienting the industry and the things that we're creating to be attractive to people, regardless of whatever the kind of macro policy and economic environment is. And that should be the end goal. Let's create climate products that are just better than what the baseline product was. rather than just climate products that are great for the environment and have XYZ trade-offs from a financial or other perspective.
That makes a ton of sense. Like a very aligned interest, win-win-win. Everyone's happy.
Yeah, and it means that you can sell to the climate skeptics and, people who don't really care about their ESG or climate emissions so far, and just be like, hey, well, you don't care about that. You don't need to report in your country. Fine. But you should take this anyway because it's going to make you more efficient. You're going to save money in the long term. And that's really cool.
So your geography teacher will be happy either way. There we go. That's brilliant.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Juliette, thank you so much. I feel like we could easily go like 4 hours today, but I will painfully wrap the episode there and say a huge thank you for sharing such a wonderful story and so much interesting insight into the world of innovation, and making me feel quite uplifted actually for the future. We got some exciting innovations and products on the way, whether next year or in 70 years, hopefully sooner. So thank you, Juliette. And for those who want to check out Climate Connection, we'll link it in the show notes. It's climateconnection.co.uk, right? And,
yeah, that's right.
And we'll put anything else you want to give a shout out to, any other links or anything?
Well, I think your point just there about, hope for the future, I would definitely say if you're ever kind of in one of those moments where you're feeling the climate anxiety, or you are just thinking like we're not going to make it or whatever else, even with all of these obstacles, I would say like looking at some of the innovations that are being created and the stuff that's being done in the entrepreneurial and innovation sector is probably one of the coolest ways of just like giving yourself a little bit of a morale boost. Because when you suddenly realize, oh wow, someone's figured out how to grow concrete from bacteria, it just blows your mind, and you're like, great, we might not have figured out how we roll this out, but at least we've got some really freaking smart people working on this stuff and figuring out how to do just things that we couldn't even have conceived of decades ago.
It's incredible. I'm gonna have to check that out. That sounds amazing. I hugely hopeful now for the future. Thank you, Juliette. I really appreciate your time today, and I'll see you at an event soon. And hope you have a good rest of the day. And thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks, James. Yeah, no, this was a lot of fun.
Cheers.